Welcome to Abstracts. This week, Arthur Fleck.
What would it be like to really strip it all down and do a really intimate character study, a deep dive kind of handmade movie where you explore one of these characters in an intense way?
My opinions about the character were always changing. I was never certain of what his motivations were. I think that was part of the appeal for me as an actor, was to explore all the different possibilities.
We meet a guy who is, someone who has been told his whole life that his purpose is to bring laughter and joy to the world, and he believes it, and he's sees himself as this put upon sweet soul in a city full of harsh people.
He experienced childhood trauma, and I think that more than anything kind of shapes his perception of the world. I realized that he was had the traits of post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's somebody that's in a highly reactive state in which they perceive and look for a threat everywhere.
It's looking pretty much like Gotham City today outside. Rainy,
really bleak,
grim, cloudy,
villains down on the streets.
Great day to do an episode.
Absolutely, when we're feeling uplifted. And
what are we drinking?
Edinburgh Gin.
You picked this one because of the Fringe Festival.
Yeah.
Your tenuous link.
No. I mean, I was so burnt after the Star Wars episode because I couldn't get my hands on the Kenobi gin. And I was so burnt after that, I thought we have to have some tenuous connection between the gin and the episode.
So you picked Edinburgh because of Fringe because
Festival.
of comedy,
Yeah.
because of stand-ups.
Exactly.
Nice.
And because of the Joker.
Have you seen it? Obviously you've...
No, I haven't seen it. I will be doing this totally unprepared, and naturally we'll be doing about 2 hours.
I feel like this is going to be one of them. Oh, how you doing, Matthew?
Yeah, really good. Really good.
Nice one.
On this bleak, horrible day.
It's so grim. Raining, terrible, windy, stormy. What storm is it? It's got a name, hasn't it?
Dennis.
Dennis!
Yeah, it's got a male name for a change.
Mm.
Yeah, instead of it being the chaotic feminine, it's now,
Dennis.
It's going to put the roofs back on. Yeah, Dennis has come in.
It's going to fix everything Katrina ruined.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully people can, sense the sarcasm and irony in my voice.
Although that probably would have been a story in Greek mythology or something,
Yeah.
There would have been some, evil queen.
The symbolic chaos of the feminine. Yeah, exactly. No,
there
totally. Yeah, so it's up to us. It's our responsibility to bring a little bit of light on this bleak day. So let's talk about something really uplifting.
Yeah, totally. Joker, murder, terrible mental health.
People falling out at the bottom of society and things going terribly wrong.
Oh, completely. Basically, Batman and Joker is the best hero-villain combination ever, in my opinion. I don't know, what do you think? Can you think of anyone better, really, than them?
It's that combo, not that combination. So you could think of great heroes, great superheroes, all of that. I mean, look, we've had the Avengers, you can see it all, but in terms of that dynamic, that duo, that dyad, I agree with you, there.
It's just there's no one better. Like Lex Luthor, Superman, not as good. Spider-Man, Green Goblin, if we stray from DC, just doesn't really... they're not made for each other the same way Batman and Joker have come to be.
No, and the thing with Superman is he's too perfect. I mean,
Right.
this is a really commonly levied criticism, so,
Yeah.
I can't belabor it, but he's too perfect. It's very difficult,
Because he can just shoot laser beams and sack bullets off. And
exactly.
it's just...
Until someone turns up with the green stuff, the kryptonite again.
Yeah.
You go, okay, fine, he's just a normal bloke again.
Yeah.
But with Batman, he's fundamentally quite damaged in the first place.
Yeah.
It's not like he's some gleaming beacon of idealism.
Mm. And he's not from another planet, he's a normal human.
Yeah, that's quite nice. I mean, he's a normal human.
Superheroes. He doesn't have superpowers, sorry.
No.
Like natural superpowers.
I mean, he does have one superpower, which is that he's a billionaire.
That's true. But is that a superpower? Maybe that's another podcast. I don't know. Is money a superpower? I suppose he did inherit it.
I reckon I could feel like I could fly with £1 billion.
Yeah, mate. Yeah. I'd get all those wings, that Batmobile, that Batcave. I'd love a Batcave. It'd be amazing.
Well, this isn't far off a Batcave, but sure.
Yeah. Man cave. I suppose, even you see Batman permeates culture. That's where man cave must have come from. Must be from Batcave.
This is etymology at its finest.
Exactly, man. That must be where it comes. But Joker, before we get to our version, who's your favourite Joker out of the Joker movies?
I'm going to be really boring and say Heath Ledger.
Heath Ledger's yours.
I loved it. I mean, I really like the really sort of realistic, gritty approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, look, Heath Ledger, personally, I think isn't as realistic and maybe gritty as the newer one, because it's still very kind of campy in the sense that it's still heroes and villains and it's the Joker. But I loved him. I loved him. Campy but realistic. Whereas some of the others, not so much for me.
You're saying Jack Nicholson was just full campy?
Yeah, that was full camp. That was Jack Nicholson,
his toxic grin spray
with his crazy grin.
Yeah.
It wasn't for me, that one. I don't dislike it, but I don't love it. What about you?
Yeah, same. Heath Ledger. Heath Ledger is mine. But it's been played many, many times. First was by Cesar Romero in the 1960s in the TV show with Adam West. You know, that old bang, thwack, Batman.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, in that series, the guy who played the Joker... No, sorry, not the Joker. The Penguin was a guy called Burgess Meredith, who is in Rocky. He's the old man in Rocky's Corner. Then after that, it was ages later, and then Jack Nicholson was the next Joker after Cesar Romero. Then it was Heath Ledger in 2008. Then Jared Leto in Suicide Squad in
That is contentious, isn't it?
Really is. I think everyone would rather forget that, including Jared Leto.
And including DC. So I just watched Birds of Prey.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, really
Not
quite
seen
good,
it.
actually. I'm going to recommend it. I don't care what anyone else says. I think it's quite good.
How many shots of Harley Quinn's arse are in it?
Actually, not that many, I don't think.
Fantastic,
So-
because that would made Suicide Squad almost unwatchable.
Yeah.
And I'm not being all feminist here. I was just like, my God, it's like there's not one scene where you see her where it's not a shot of her ass.
Like when
first.
they're getting dressed.
Totally.
Yeah,
or something.
No, it was really, really good. Really quite good fun. The Oscars need to have a stunt performer category. I know, this guy got a Lifetime Achievement Award. I've forgotten his name for stunts, but they need to, because that stunt team, incredible.
Really?
And I had money down that Tony Jaa was going to be the guy behind it, but he wasn't. It's got a real kind of Thai or Eastern influence. Anyone who doesn't know Tony Jaa, do you know Tony Jaa?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Ong
so
Bak.
exactly, Ong Bak, and some of his students did these crazy ones, because in Thailand there's this saying, which is somehow, in some sense based on truth, which is that a stunt performer in Thailand is cheaper than a crash mat.
Right.
So you see these crazy stunts. It's like, do we get the crash mat and the stunt performer? Well, it's cheap enough just to get them to jump off the roof.
So it's not like he who eateth the elbow go to sleep.
So it really had that feeling to it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's great to watch. But
So it was quite tough, quite visceral, quite hardcore.
quite visceral, very different to Suicide
Yeah.
Squad, but again, very different to Joker. But the reason I bring it up is they totally retconned Jared Leto. I mean, they did flashbacks and everything right at the beginning, and
No Joker.
he wasn't there. I mean, I think maybe the back of his head, when it's blurred out, was kind of in there at one point. Not bright green hair.
Well, maybe they're trying to... Well, there might be some contractual stuff to break the obligation, because Leto's doing the vampire, isn't he, for Marvel? He's playing a vampire character.
Is he?
Yeah, like a lead one or something. I can't remember the name of the character, but he is.
I mean, I'm sure if they show his face, they've got to pay him some money. I'm sure there's something like that, but...
Yeah, for sure. Maybe he just didn't want anything to do with it.
No, apparently I saw some interview where he said he was disappointed. He was disappointed he wasn't included, so...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, poor Jared.
I know, poor Jared, making millions.
So there was Jared Leto, and then most recently, obviously, Joaquin Phoenix in 2019, who won an Oscar for it, and whose performance we'll be having a look at today. But Joker's also been played in animation by Kevin Michael Richardson and also Mark Hamill.
I mean, that was the core performance of the Joker, I think.
That is universally agreed
Yeah.
that Mark Hamill is the best Joker
He
of all
is the
time.
Joker, and he has the laugh of the Joker.
Absolutely. And it's what you think. Even if you don't know what Joker is, you know that it sounds like Mark Hamill.
Yeah, or maybe the Joker sounds like Mark Hamill, as opposed to the Mark Hamill sounding like the Joker. I mean, it's he's that kind of intertwined with
That's
the Joker.
it. Just massively influential. Everybody kind of bases it
For
off
anyone who
that.
doesn't know who Mark Hamill is, Luke Skywalker.
But yeah, it was in the Batman animated series and the Arkham video series, which is awesome. Have you played Arkham Knight?
Yes, and Arkham City.
So good. The Joker, the parts that they put the Joker in Arkham Knight, and just kind of the background of Batman's brain, really
Arkham
good.
City, is that one
Is
of
the-
its own?
No, Arkham City.
Arkham Knight, I've played about half of that, and then what was the one before that?
Arkham
Asylum.
City. I think.
Arkham City.
The first one was Arkham Asylum.
Yeah, I think I played the last two.
Yeah.
Very good films, very good games though.
Totally.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
well done. The narrative was really strong in all of them.
Oh man, yeah. Arkham Knight as well. Really, really class. But they used the Joker really great in that game too. So No, but just as well, we will be talking a lot about the film Joker, so there will be spoilers in this podcast. But just to go back a little bit about how the Joker, how the character came to be. First appeared in the 1940s, in 1940, actually, in Batman 1. So the first ever Batman comic. Batman had been comics before.
Really? So he was there right at the beginning?
Right at the beginning, episode 1. So was Catwoman as well, incidentally.
Really?
Like, Batman himself had been around before because he was in Detective Comics. That's where you get DC. So they had a run of comics called Detective Comics, and in that there was a character Batman, and that's where you get DC Comics from. But Batman got his own comic in 1940.
I mean, I don't know much about these comics. How standard was the whole detective element, the theme? Was it just like fairly normal, fairly kind of like, CIA or whatever? Well, not CIA.
Well, I guess so, because at the time, when we're talking
and then there's
like
a guy dressed as a
1930s,
bat
40s.
suddenly.
Yeah, but it was all like noir-y, there would have been stuff in newspapers, weren't there? Like little kind of detective stories.
CSI, not CIA. CSI. Like, I have this image of it being like CSI, and then suddenly a guy comes in dressed as a bat. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, totally. It, like in a way, but swinging ropes with his sidekick Robin. Robin the Wonder Boy. And in that first episode, in the early days of the Joker, he was a murderer. He was like a homicidal murderer. He just did killings and all this kind of stuff. But later on as it went on, he got less murderous and started setting more traps and doing more heists and things like that. And that was kind of coinciding because comics were getting more censored. There was the Comic Codes Authority came in 1954, and they had rules on violence and language and all this kind of stuff. Decency, really.
Right.
Quite famously, Swamp Thing departed from that. First Alan Moore departed from it in the 80s, and it changed kind of modern comic books, but maybe that's another story.
I'm sure he'll come up later on.
Yeah, that's it. But it was during this period that like Joker got basically his backstory. A dude called Bill Finger. So like Bob Kane's...
Sorry, who?
Yeah, right. Exactly. A lot of people say who? Bill Finger who? Because Batman, right? It's Bob Kane. We all associate it with Bob Kane. Who invented the character, but the story of Batman and the story of Joker, like their backstories that we most famously know, this guy Bill Finger came up with it, and that's where we get the story of like Joker used to be this character called the Red Hood, and at one point he falls into a vat of like acid trying to escape from Batman, and he comes out with his green hair and his white face and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of how his background was born in the early 50s. But before then, no real such backstory.
Interesting. Okay.
And so Joker of this year, or of last year, doesn't follow any backstory, doesn't follow any of these.
No. Inspired by, but doesn't follow any narratives that I'm aware of.
Yep.
I think one of the main inspirations was from The Killing Joke, but it is simply inspirations as opposed to following that story. Because in The Killing Joke, he's a failed comedian, and it's the same kind of tone. It's got the same tone as the new film. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, Todd Phillips, the director, did explicitly say that it doesn't follow any narratives. But it's highly inspired by all the old canon material.
I think he tweeted once saying like people are going to be pissed off because it's got nothing to do with any of the comics.
Yeah.
And one of the big big criticisms levied at comic book movies is that they don't actually use the comic book stories to try to invent new ones, and they're always getting it wrong. Why don't they just use one of the old stories?
The problem I have with that, though, and this happened with Star Wars as well, is the core fan base would know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's true.
So I mean, you're either going to upset them by not doing it correctly,
yeah, or
you're going to upset them because they know what's going to happen anyway. So just do something different.
That's it. As the Star Wars film recently showed, you're going to upset everybody. Whatever you do.
So don't do anything.
That's it. But what did you think of it? What were your favourite things about the new Joker movie?
The tone of it. The tone of it was really gritty, dark, and it took you to a place that I don't think many films do. I heard a lot of people say that it was too dark for them. They felt kind of fatigued by it.
Really?
Yeah. Well, these were a lot of the critics that I was reading. They said they felt fatigued by it because other films...
Well, it's not that relentless. You know what I mean?
I didn't think it was that relentless. I thought it took me to a really interesting place where I started with a really damaged guy and I ended up going to a place where I went, yeah, I can see how he got here. I can understand how he's and why he's doing these things. And he didn't feel like the bad guy. He felt to me like a really troubled man who was doing bad things. And I found that journey and the tonality that took me through it really fascinating.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that element of it. Were there story elements that could have been improved, in my opinion. Sure. Were there things that could have been done differently? Sure. But the tone, I really, really liked. What about you?
Yeah, same. Tone and kind of the production design, the way it was shot. I loved how 70s it was. I love movies like that, so I know that it was, all Taxi Driver, King of Comedy kind of style.
Well, Todd Phillips did actually put a year on this, 1981. He said it's generally from around that time, but 1981 is the year in his mind that this is based in.
Yeah, that's true, because it does have it again, just as being 70s and Taxi Driver, it does like have flavours of like those early 80s movies, like Red Heat and those action-y movies. But no, really good. But I just love like the production design. I love the sets. I like the colours. I thought like the city was great.
The colour grading and how they used colour was really, really clever.
Yeah, man. But I also really liked kind of, like there's the whole storyline where like Thomas Wayne's supposed to be his dad. And like, I really liked that. Not because, well, obviously it doesn't work out and that's not the truth. But I liked it because it was an interesting way of putting them two characters together. Like the Batman and Joker linking them, like kind of both orphans, both like lonely, both looking for someone to play with, really.
Yeah.
Effectively. They're like boys playing dress up, playing with each other. In a way. Yeah, and I thought that was nice because they're both so isolated from each other, and that's why they never really kill each other. He never kills Joker. Joker never kills Batman. It's always, they always find a way to carry on the game, to keep it going. They can't do without each other. And I like that kind of brotherhood idea, even though it's not by blood, and then it's not really, but I like that idea.
I know what
I've
you mean.
never seen that before. It's always been like, he's trying to put Joker away, help him, stop him somehow, but I'd never seen it in that fashion before. I thought it was cool.
It was a nice link. It was a bit different. A bit different. Bit of an age differential. You sort of wonder how old the Joker would be when Batman was in his prime, but...
Well, how old is he? Like 40?
I don't know.
Early 40s?
Because you could say someone with a really hard life could have looked like that.
Oh, completely. In like the mid-30s.
Yeah, maybe late 30s. Possibly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was a really good film.
Yeah,
really
good class. But it might be quite interesting to talk about like what they like you yourself like we mentioned what Todd Phillips said about the character, because the character is Arthur Fleck and it's a new way of the Joker, having the Joker. But he says that he and Joaquin Phoenix, and this is quoting from him, he said, "We talked a lot about who he'd be and why he is like this. What is his thing and what does that laugh come from and why does he wear makeup or not?" And we just started reading a lot about narcissism, really.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, narcissistic edge, because it's this narcissistic kind of egoless narcissist.
Yeah.
And actually, it's probably worth bringing in two other films here as inspirations and just referencing one. Because Todd Phillips also then mentioned that Taxi Driver and King of Comedy, well, The King of Comedy, were two of the main inspirations for this.
I love King of Comedy.
It's a great film.
So good.
Yeah.
That's probably my favourite Martin Scorsese film.
Really? Yeah, so you told me to watch that one first. I prefer Taxi Driver, but I think it's a great film, much more fun than watching Taxi Driver. But I thought the interesting thing for me when I was watching King of Comedy, and what I would say to anyone listening to this, is actually just go away and watch those two films first, because they're incredible, and spoilers, we're going to tell you what happens in those as well, I imagine, just accidentally. But in King of Comedy, it's much more about the narcissism. It's this guy who, has these illusions of grandeur, and he's very narcissistic, and he believes he's going to be great, just as long as he could get himself on TV.
Yeah, right.
There are other elements in Taxi Driver, and when you kind of put them together, you get Joker. Right? You get the darker elements, the vengeance, all of that in Taxi Driver, whereas it's all just narcissism. And that's what you don't really see. You don't really see it come through in the same way as in King of Comedy. It's right there in your face in King of Comedy. Whereas in Joker, it's not obvious that he's a narcissist. It's hinted at. Like, for example, through his delusions. When he is, for example,
like
in
that
the...
girl, and she's so attractive.
Yes.
And it's like, how on earth... Because all the way through it, I'm like, how on earth is that realistic?
Yeah, so I did think that the first viewing, I was like, what's going on here? This better be explained.
Exactly.
Something
and then
wrong
when
with
it
her.
was, I was like, brilliant.
Yeah. But then even the first delusion he has when he's... or hallucination he has when he's watching the late night TV show and he believes he's there.
Right.
Or at least he sees himself as being there. And everyone's telling him how great he is, and Murray embraces him and says, I'd give up everything to have a child like you.
Yeah.
That's where you see the narcissism start to come seeping through, but there's no kind of ego there. And I think you mentioned this as well. There's no core ego to the guy.
That's it. It's hard to pin down.
Yeah.
As to like what he is, and apparently Joaquin Phoenix wanted that. Joaquin Phoenix, in an interview with Deadline, said that he didn't want a psychologist to be able to identify what kind of person he was, and that he wanted a mystery to remain about the character, and that he was interested in the light side of Arthur Fleck, and his like struggle to find happiness and feel connected and warmth and love and stuff like that. But fuck you, Joaquin Phoenix, because we're going to try and diagnose you.
However, we're going to do it at a distance. But then, even then, just to quickly come back to that point, one thing that Todd Phillips said, just in addition to that, is that the core theme that runs throughout the Joker for him is kindness, which really ties in with what you were just saying about Joaquin Phoenix's idea about how discovering the light side of Arthur Fleck was important for him.
Mm-hmm.
Because for Todd Phillips, it's, how powerful kindness is, and then what happens when you don't have it. When society rips kindness away from you, all you want is a bit of kindness. Like, for example, in the bathroom scene. Why are people being like this to me? Why can't you just be kind?
Yeah, that's what Phillips said. He said there's a loss of empathy in the world that we all feel nowadays. Everything else was built on that. What if you grew up in a world without empathy? What if our Gotham was cold, dark place full of people who really didn't give a shit about each other? That's where this villain comes from. Yeah.
And so, I mean, we can see that in our everyday lives now. If you live in a city, you'll know this. And maybe it's slightly instructive to start with loneliness. Loneliness is shown to be really, really damaging for people. So we all live in cities. Well, no, we all live in cities. Me and you live in a city. We live in London.
Yeah.
Anyone who lives in a city will know how isolated it is. You won't know your neighbour. I know my neighbour now, but we won't know our neighbours. You can be in a crowded place and not know anybody.
That's one of the core themes of Taxi Driver, is loneliness in a big city.
Yeah, to be observing the world. I mean, that's so key for him because he's a taxi driver and he views the social world around him. But he's constantly one step removed. Yeah.
And does inappropriate things. Yes. Like he takes her on an inappropriate date. Why would you take her to a sex cinema to watch a porn film? It's just, that's what people do. He has this weird interpretation of what.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's really kind of key for people that have things like schizotypal personality disorder, which some people believe is a bit like a less severe form of schizophrenia, and things like that, not quite understanding what's right and wrong socially. And we're not just talking something like autism spectrum, not quite understanding social cues. We're talking like people having really very off-the-wall interpretations of right and wrong and morality and all of that sort of thing. And you see that in Taxi Driver. But there was one study that basically showed that loneliness is as bad for you as smoking. Smoking 15 cigarettes a day, I think it was.
Really?
Yeah. And this is in the APA, so the American Psychological Association. They're at it again. In one of our old podcasts, we sort of mentioned how they constantly misquote from studies.
Yep.
So they did this thing where they said...
maybe Batman should take on the APA.
Yeah, APA. We should do a whole thing on this at some point. They said that this researcher found that loneliness and social isolation are twice as harmful to physical and mental health as obesity. The actual quote is that basically it's greater. So a lack of social relationships, the risk for mortality is greater than from obesity. But when we're talking about obesity, we're talking like 30 BMI upwards. So really quite obese people, they're going to be in better shape than lonely people with a good BMI.
That's really hard to get a grasp on.
Yeah, so in terms of, when I say in better shape then, what we basically mean is the odds that you're going to be dead by the next follow-up meeting.
Oh, right, are more likely
if you're lonely.
If you're obese.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And you've got to be really, really careful how you pass these things out, because some people can be ill, and those illnesses make them lonely because it prevents them having social interactions, it makes them housebound, things like that. So you've got to be really, really careful when you look at these studies to make sure you pass out all of these different things. But this study did do that, and they still found that there was a really, really strong effect of loneliness on mortality.
That's interesting because, as we'll see later on, like loneliness, anxiety, stuff like that also has an effect on laughter and pathological laughter. Which is kind of interesting. But going back to what you were saying about schizotypal, was it schizotypical?
Schizotypal
personality disorder. There was a good review written. I can't remember the year, but it was a guy called Robert E. Terrell, and it was called "Put on a Happy Face," which is pretty cool because that's written on the mirror in
Yeah.
Joker. And this was almost like a film review, a psychological film review of the first ever Batman movie from 1989. And he took a Jungian approach, and the title of the paper was Batman as a Schizophrenic Saviour. Put on a happy face, Batman as a Schizophrenic Saviour. And Terrell he puts forward this idea that Gotham City is this dream world where the main characters are archetypal manifestations of the city's unconscious. So all the villains, Batman himself, Joker, various other people, they're all just subconscious manifestations, and Batman has to kind of help these people. So he views Batman in kind of a Jungian way of this kind of fractured personality, and that's what he does for the city.
Reintegration.
Exactly. So the city is psychologically damaged, and therefore Batman is also psychologically damaged, but he does the healing for the city rather than the city doing it for themselves. That's why he's like the savior of the city. He's a bit of a martyr. He quotes and he says that he preserves. Sorry, this gent's getting to me already.
You first this time.
He preserves the fractured psyche of the city, and the Joker is kind of similar to that in this version.
Yeah, because in this version, he is the main character.
That's right. And he is emergent from this city, from this place. He's a product of it, and but instead of doing the healing, he does the chaos.
Yeah. It's interesting, because when you watch it, the one thing that stood out to me is that he only actually attacks or becomes violent with people who he perceives to have wronged him. He never becomes... He never has these ideas of, these illusions of grandeur over society. He doesn't have machinations to become the next figurehead of some movement or to become a crime lord or to affect anybody else. He even let somebody go because they were kind to him, right? But somehow, even after all of that, he becomes this figurehead. Well, I found that quite interesting because he's just acting out his own truth, and somehow he gets pulled into this wider net. It's almost like you say, he's burst from Gotham. He tries to become his own person, and somehow it sucks him straight back in. He becomes this figurehead to this movement.
Unless it doesn't. Unless the person he was before was him sucked into Gotham. And this way he rises above it. But that's the power he can take from doing it.
And this is the element of control. How do you exercise control? Because so many pathologies are based on exercising control.
That's it.
Eating disorders are like this.
And if you lose control, then God knows what could happen. For example, you could start, if you lose control, you could start pathologically laughing or crying, which does happen. In the film, he's got an illness, hasn't he?
Yeah.
He says that he just laughs impromptuly, irregularly, in the wrong places, and he can't control it. It's uncontrollable to him, right?
Yeah. It's horrible. I mean, this is, emotional incontinence is one word for it. Another one is pseudobulbar affect. But one point there is that although it says pseudo in the name, it doesn't mean that it's fake, because bulbar is about brain regions. So don't think this is about fakeness. But pseudobulbar affect, PBA. If you Google it, you can find all sorts of information and videos about this. It's a very real condition that people really suffer with.
And it can cause, social problems. People not want to hang out with them, loneliness, anxiety, all this kind of stuff, which can only exacerbate the problem. But one study I found was looking for clinical correlates to PLC, or pathological laughing and crying, they call it, using this scale. And they looked at 32 patients with acute symptoms at 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months, but after a traumatic brain injury. And they found that they found a 10.9% prevalence in the first year after traumatic brain injury in the patients with the acute symptoms. So I know that in Joker he just suffers some childhood trauma or whatever or something.
That's
like
interesting that you found that because that's almost exactly the same statistic. Because I had a study here, which it was a meta-analysis, and they found that there's 6 really common comorbidities. Mm-hmm. One is ALS, the ice bucket challenge. ALS, 50% or more people with ALS have this. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily pathological laughter, because there are other versions of this. But yeah, this kind of condition.
But on an emotional incontinence level.
Exactly. Stroke, 50% or more. Multiple sclerosis, 10 to 29%.
MS comes up a lot.
Parkinson's, 5 to 17%. Yeah. Alzheimer's, 39%. And then you said traumatic brain injury, they said 5 to 11%.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, no, not nice. But
this is where you tend to see it. And so, yeah, traumatic brain injury, at least in the film, seems to be how it could be that he got it.
But we don't know, because generally in these cases it's uncontrollable and he comes to control it.
Yeah, generally.
In a way, towards the end, right?
Yeah.
He can control his states.
Well, because the interesting thing is that...
incorrectly, maybe.
Well, it used to be opposite, didn't it? Like at the beginning, when he feels sad, he laughs. But at the end, he laughs, quite evilly because he thinks things are funny. So there's the flip, isn't there? Because initially someone upsets him on the bus and he starts laughing uncontrollably to the point where it's really painful. But at the end, he's laughing because of the joke that he was thinking of.
Right.
In the same way.
There we go. It's all coming back to me through the fog of gin.
Yeah, the fog of gin is...
But what you were bringing up earlier about anxiety and loneliness, people with pathological laughing and crying were significantly more depressive, anxious, and aggressive than people without it in these test conditions.
Okay.
And they also had poorer social functioning. And what they did, because they were looking at it clinically, they came to this idea, even though they don't for sure know where it comes from or like what actually causes it. They attribute it a lot to lesions. Generally, they're like, it's because of a lesion, and the lesions are doing something with the central nervous system, and it leads to dysregulation of the limbic system.
Okay.
So that that controls social emotional regulation, like laughing appropriately or crying appropriately and stuff like that.
I found all sorts of stuff about there's a lot of theories about why this is the case.
Yeah.
Inhibitory pathways being, for example, damaged, like you say. There's all sorts of different things that could cause this.
And it's like, and this is laughter like, so Okuda, Chung, Chin, and Waubaut, and I like Waubaut because it sounds like Warbat, so I might just call them Warbat.
Let's respect the man's name. But yeah, okay.
It's pretty good. But they have it where it's basically laughter in the absence of mirth, and that the emotions expressed are unrestrained, recurrent, episodic, involuntary, and inappropriate with the given situation, commonly resulting in serious social consequences for the individual affected, in addition to their families and caregivers. So that's kind of like what the Joker has. It's kind of like he's got this pathological laughter. But to look at an actual case study, there was a 16-year-old woman that Akoda, Chung, Chin, and Waubaut had a look at, and she had acute pathological laughter. And this is kind of common thing as well. People often report numbness in the lower limbs first, before they start laughing. So the story is that this girl, she was 16, she came to the doctor and she was complaining of numbness in her left leg, and then that became weak. And they did examinations, and like the pinprick examination and the temp sensation, and it was like responses were all diminished in these areas. But she had increased reflexes in both limbs in the lower part of the body. So like, an MRI scan revealed abnormalities in the corpus callosum, and she had basically a lesion in her brain, because it's kind of in two parts, right? Because she goes and she's got this thing in her brain, and they treat it with corticosteroids, right?
Fine.
And it goes away.
Cool.
She deals with it. So 2 months later, she comes back and she's got a weak leg again, slurred speech, and she can't swallow. And she's also describing fits of laughter, like this uncontrollable laughter, which fits this pseudo-bulbar effect that you were talking about. So they did another MRI, and they found another lesion, this time on the other side, and this time bigger. So they treated her again with corticosteroids and prednisone, this time, which is an immune suppressant, and she responded really well after 3 months. But she also had multiple sclerosis, and they give her interferon, so that could have helped out with it as well, and it got rid of the pathological laughter. So this is another kind of interesting thing in Joker, because he doesn't really have access to adequate healthcare, and it could be that he maybe had a lesion, and it could be that this lesion was actually causing this demyelinizing disease.
I mean, for anyone listening, myelin essentially increases the receptivity of neurons, basically enables them to fire over longer distances more quickly. It's almost like turning off the electricity in your brain in some sense.
So that's what they were saying these lesions might be doing, but they don't really know for sure.
Yeah.
But Arthur Fleck in the film, he doesn't really have his brain scanned ever, so we don't know if there's lesions. He's just got that counsellor. But it could be that if they scanned his brain, they might have found lesions, could have pumped him with some corticosteroids and avoid this whole sordid mess.
Yeah, although I don't think it
Really?
was all necessarily down to his laughter.
No. I was just looking at just the laughter.
Just
so
the
like
laughter,
looking
yeah.
at what he's got, right? Like,
Yeah.
how could you maybe? Well, I mean, you might not stop him going on and killing that dude, but you might be able to make his life easier with the stopping
well,
these
this is
laughter
the thing
fits.
as well, though, because he's taken a lot of flack socially from people because of the laughter. So, you know, it's largely going to be the straw that broke the camel's back. And in this film, it was those three guys, the Wall Street guys on the underground. But, yeah, maybe going through life, I mean, first of all, he was abused by a stepfather, chained to a radiator and had head traumas.
That's what I mean.
I
There
mean,
you go.
that's the very beginning. But then throughout the entirety of his life, he'll have been shunned by society and made to feel shame. And shame is an extremely powerful emotion that does all sorts of damaging things to you neurologically. He's had that throughout his entire life. And then, you know, the straw that broke the camel's back is these three guys on the underground. He has a gun. He's not meant to have a gun. Interestingly, if you hear him, there is a line for this. When he's given the gun in the film by his co-worker, he says, "I'm not meant to have this." Because, of course, he's mentally ill. He's not allowed to have a gun. And then that brings it back to the element of control. He's gone through his entire life being shunned, feeling shame, feeling powerless. You know, he's got this involuntary laughter. Totally powerless. Suddenly he has a gun. And suddenly he exercises control for the first time in his life. And then he says afterwards, I always felt... I'm going to paraphrase this, probably terribly, but he says, I always felt like I didn't exist.
Yeah.
However, now I do. The city's starting to wake up. People
Yeah.
are starting to realise that I'm here. Because he's exercising control over his environment.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to recede from the world, he's suddenly... Well, his new tool for engaging with the world instead...
Is his character.
His
Joker.
character, and it's the gun. It's violence. And that's how he's understood that he can control his environment. And it's a shame that that's the way it happened. And there's all sorts of examples of, you know, failings in healthcare.
Yeah. Well, we've just had one.
Well, yeah.
Like that young guy who chucked that child off the tape.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's an autistic person who should have had round-the-clock care.
Well, they told their carer as well that they were planning on doing something like this.
Yeah.
So there were all sorts of... I mean, there's going to be inquiries into that. But some of the famous ones from the 90s were, you know, Christopher Clunas, who had schizophrenia, and he killed Jonathan Zito in London in 92, like I say. And, you know, in the inquiry, they found that there were all these failures of the healthcare system, like poor communication, lack of continuity, and this kind of reluctance to provide him the services he needed, which you see in Joker. You know, other examples are like Michael Stone, psychopathic disorder, killed Lynn Russell and her daughter, and that was in 96. And essentially, this was you know, dangerous and severe personality disorders. This was the category that was introduced to the healthcare services as a result of that, because people weren't being given the mental health care they required.
And that's literally exactly what happens in Joker.
Yeah.
He's holding on by that little link. All he's got is that counsellor, but then that's the only support network he has. His mother's useless. He's caring for his psycho mother. So all that happens is when the counsellor disappears, is he's just left with his own thoughts and with the thoughts of his mother, and like he can run into his hallucinations and just let them run riot.
And the really sad thing is as well, you know, one of the things that you'll find in risk assessments that demonstrate that people are likely to offend or you know, let's say negative outcomes are likely to take place, is that people don't engage with their healthcare providers. But the guy, I mean, he is engaging. I mean, reluctantly, but he does do the diary. He turns it into a joke book, but he is engaging with the care that's being provided to him. Unfortunately, it's defunded by Thomas Wayne. Was it Thomas Wayne who defunded it, or was he running for mayor at the time?
I think he was running for mayor at the time, isn't he?
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and see that bit. I don't remember those final plot points.
But yeah, I mean, so they defund the program and he gets it taken away from him.
That happens all the time.
Happens all the time. It's just another example in the narrative of his life where he's just being thrown aside like garbage by society, which he says later on almost exactly.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up garbage because the production designer of the film brings up garbage. A guy, Mark Friedberg, he did all the sets for Joker, and he was talking about how they designed it and the aesthetic feel of it.
Yeah.
And he's quoted here as saying, you start talking about being in New York in the early 80s, late 70s, garbage strikes.
Yeah.
What New York looked like. That's what it was. It was just piles of garbage everywhere.
Yeah.
Which is really nice visual
Yeah.
cue
I
for
mean,
what's going on.
that is it, isn't it? In 81, there are these garbage strikes taking place, which is, why you see it everywhere, but it's a great aesthetic for the film.
So good, but bringing it back to emotional incontinence that you brought up earlier, there was a study that I found about this. So just to clear up the definition of emotional incontinence, as it might be different from pathological laughter, because it is slightly pathological.
Yeah.
Pathological laughter, I guess, is a subset, sub part of emotional incontinence.
Yes.
But it's a perturbing condition characterized by uncontrollable outbursts of exaggerated involuntary facial expressions and pathological crying or laughter. There is increased evidence that serotonergic transmission may be damaged in emotional incontinence. And this particular study, Nahas et al. In 1998, they took 5 subjects. 3 of them were post-stroke, 1 with multiple sclerosis, and another with pathological laughter after traumatic brain injury. Is this the same study you found? No, you found a meta-analysis, didn't you?
Yeah.
And I thought this was kind of interesting because 4 of the cases are kind of similar in that they're more or less old men, but there's one case that I think highlights Joker and what we're talking about in terms of access to mental health brilliantly, and just how perhaps some of this could have been avoided. So the first case was a 68-year-old African-American man with 2 cerebrovascular accidents which led to a bilateral weakness in the body. Again, weakness in the body caused by some kind of brain accident. Basically, he was anxious and prone to explosive outbursts and tearfulness. And an MRI showed that atrophy in some areas of his cortex. So they gave him fluoxetine, which is an SSRI. And this study was all about testing SSRIs on emotional incontinence. And it works in all cases, which is really crazy. So, he had a significant reduction in 3 days. Another dude, 62-year-old Caucasian guy, weakness in lower extremities. He had hyperintensity. They gave him sertraline, which is another SSRI.
Just for anyone listening, SSRI.
Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It's an antidepressant.
Exactly.
Really. And that was gone in 2 days. The third case, the 58-year-old Caucasian guy, hypertension again. He had tissue death in his right parietal region of the brain, which I don't know what it is, but I'm going to say it anyway. And he had depressive symptoms, crying outbursts, etc. They gave him sertraline as well. His crying was gone in 3 days, but his depression remained for about 3 weeks. And this is kind of the case all round. 67-year-old Caucasian, history of schizophrenia and hypertension. He used to grimace and all that kind of stuff, and he used to cry as well, and he kind of alienated a lot of other people in the home because they thought that if they just talked to him, he'd just start crying. They thought they made him sad, so it kind of affected his personal relationships. So they gave him a dose of paroxetine, and there was a huge improvement in 4 days, but they needed to keep doubling his dose a little bit to stop it.
So essentially, if you throw drugs at people, it may sort this out.
Well, SSRIs in particular.
Antidepressants.
Yeah, exactly. But the one that they highlight in this study as being most kind of important, the one that's more along the lines of Joker, because it's similar age. Well, not too crazy age, but younger. And there was this 21-year-old guy, and he got thrown off his motorbike, right, in Saudi Arabia, and he was in a coma for 6 weeks. And when he came out of it, he just started laughing. He had problems with speech, memory, concentration, language manipulation, and all of his impulse controls. Just this hysterical laughter at really inappropriate moments. It was just like ruining his life. Yeah. And so they treated him with fluoxetine, again at 20 milligrams, and it changed within 2 days. It was gone in 2 days. And then they just doubled his dosage to 40, and then that completely got rid of his laughing outbursts. So that study to me proves the importance of having good access to good mental health. Because if all it is a case of an SSRI, in some cases that this is a debilitating situation these people find themselves in because of some brain trauma, and it's not going to get rid of all the other things that are associated with that trauma, but to relieve some of that physiological stress of just laughing.
It's a bit like deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's. It doesn't necessarily get rid of it, but it really relieves people of a lot of the symptoms, so people can live their lives.
And that's it.
Just to put a sort of a cap on that topic, a really nice distinction that I found. Someone said that this breaks into affective lability and pathological laughter and crying. So affective lability is just basically your emotions that are expressed, they're exaggerated, relative to the stimulus. But they are congruent. They are in the same direction. So you might you might tell me a bad joke, and I'll be laughing like it's the best thing I've ever heard. You might call me a nasty name, and I'll be crying like, my family's just died. That's affective ability. But it may be partially controllable, to your point earlier. But then there's pathological laughter and crying, and that's, the emotions exaggerated. I'll be crying, I'll be laughing, but it might also go in the opposite direction. You'll tell me a funny joke and I'll just start crying uncontrollably, and it's totally involuntary, to your point earlier. So those are the two things, that affective ability. And just to break down the words, affective, that we're just talking about emotions. So how your emotions... Lability, just how quickly they can move. So basically quick emotions. And pathological laughter and crying. So that's how that breaks down. And it's fairly clear that Joker has pathological laughter.
Yeah, totally.
And that's it.
But aside from that, I couldn't really find anything else.
No, I mean, there's not really much more to say about that. I mean, Joaquin Phoenix did say that he didn't want it to be diagnosable.
That's what I mean, and he's done a great job. Because, even if you think of all the different things that we could have diagnosed him as, or I could have said that.
Well, schizotype, schizophrenia, pseudobulbar affect, all that sort of stuff.
But none of it's so obvious, as being exactly what it is. So, well done.
No, but I mean, look, it is definitely a type of pathological laughter that he's got. So I don't know how non-diagnosable that really is. And he did say he's based it off of those individuals. He actually modelled the laugh and the way he was laughing off of videos of those people. So, yeah, it is fairly diagnosable. Sorry, Joaquin. But yeah, it's good. And then, we've spoken about loneliness, we've spoken about shame and how society pushes you out. But I think it's interesting how someone like that goes from being marginalised to violence. So one thing I found is that I didn't realise how difficult it is to do risk assessments on people in terms of how likely they are to offend. That was very loud in my earphones.
Sorry, was it? Terribly sorry.
Yeah, the sound of gin being undone. You know what? Throw a bit more in mine.
Yeah. You just never know the likelihood of someone wanting to drown their own mother in a bathtub.
Or drown myself in a bottle of gin.
There you go.
Yeah. But the really difficult thing about violence is that, especially when you talk about mental health, very often they correlate strongly. But the problem is correlation is not causation.
Violence or aggression correlate?
Violence.
Right, okay.
Well, and aggression. Aggression that leads to violence. So, for example, you might look at the demographics, the family background, the criminal justice background, life stress, family friendship. And there was a really interesting one where they basically did risk assessments on people that left in inpatient units. And they found that they could predict the non-violent individuals correctly 94% of the time. So they said these people won't reoffend, and 94% of them didn't reoffend. So they can fairly well assess who's not going to do anything else. Whereas when those they predicted to be violent or to reoffend, 56% of those reoffended. So, I mean, admittedly, almost everybody who reoffended was diagnosed as being a reoffender. Or designated as it.
Right.
But then there was this 44% of people that didn't actually reoffend that were designated as potential reoffenders. Right, so they sort of said, okay, all these people aren't going to do anything else. They're not going to reoffend, and they were practically correct. And they said, and everybody else, they're going to reoffend. And only about half of them actually reoffended. So it's fairly easy to identify who's definitely not going to reoffend. It's very, very difficult to actually specify who is going to reoffend. Because the only real variables that we have are age and gender and criminal history. They're the only things really that give you a good handle on who's going to reoffend.
So if they've offended before...
And to what extent. And what gender they are and how old they are. The younger, the more likely. And you
sort of think, well, you never know until they do something.
Pretty much. And even then, let's imagine we make those three variables really specific, and we just imagine... in this hypothetical world that you could say, okay, if you're this old and you're male and you've got this criminal history, you're going to reoffend. Those variables tell you absolutely nothing about the sort of treatment program that you require for that individual. Because those individuals will have all sorts of different problems. Maybe one of them schizophrenic, the other one's got, they were abused when they were younger, the other person. Those three variables tell you nothing about the treatment program that will reduce their reoffending rates. So it's really, really difficult to actually assess this in a clinical setting.
So even though Arthur Fleck is in a hospital at the end of the film,
yeah,
there's no idea with what they're going to do with him.
No, it's very difficult to say what the risk is. And the really interesting thing that I hadn't considered before about this is that as soon as you say we're going to do risk assessments on people, that carries a political element to it. Because you say, right, well, what level of risk is society willing to accept? We can, because then you start moving towards a Minority Report kind of world, where you say we're not willing to accept any risk. It's very likely you're going to reoffend in the future, so we're just going to stop you right here. But at the moment we're willing to accept quite a high level of risk. But you can imagine as violence is on the rise, or at least the perception of violence is on the rise, we're willing to accept less and less risk. And that will affect the people who are having risk assessments done on them. And today, those risk assessments aren't very precise. They're capturing like 44% of people who actually won't reoffend, and they're lumping them in with the reoffenders.
Quite a few different kind of offenders like slip through these kind of checks, if you will.
Yeah, and the problem is we haven't really got fine enough nets.
The problem is we don't have a Batman.
We don't have a Batman.
To go out there on the street and clean up these guys, We
don't have a psychopath in a bat suit.
That's it. That's what we need. We need an overarching bad guy to come out and take on all of the problems society has in one person. We need like an ultimate supervillain, and then we need a Batman.
So, yeah, Trump is the ultimate supervillain, maybe?
He's kind of a Lex Luthor, would you say?
Or Hillary Clinton, based on your politics.
Mm.
We can appeal to both sides here. Yeah. But to round off the point about violence, one thing I found that was quite interesting is something that's being worked on at the moment, which is because this research on violence is so poor. When I say poor, it's just very difficult. Because I mean, how do you get a sample of people that are terribly violent?
Yeah.
I mean, these people don't turn up to do research studies on who they're going to stab next.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to get this data properly. And there's all these different theories. I found a great quote actually, which I thought really applied, because there was this book, Human Aggression, and they go through all these different theories on aggression, like the cognitive neo-association theory, and the social learning theory, and the script theory, and the excitation transfer theory, and the social interaction
evolutionary theory.
There's all sorts of theories of human aggression, and it comes to this general aggression model, the theory to end all theories. And ultimately, it's a bit like, this isn't working, is it? There's a great quote. It says, "Science is built up with fact, as a house is with stone. But a collection of facts is no more a science than a heap of stones is a house." There's just all these theories everywhere. Just like there's all these bricks. It doesn't make it a house, or stones in that quote. Bricks don't make a house. You have to construct the bricks properly. You have to put the facts together in a way that actually makes sense. And at the moment, that's what the aggression research is like. It's all these bricks. And the general aggression theory tries to put something together, but if you look at it, you kind of go, surely we don't need all of these flowcharts. There's something like in physics, it's like the more simple the theory and the more simple the expression, the more likely it is to be correct. This idea of parsimony. The more parsimonious, the better. And the research is a bit of a mess at the moment. But there was one thing I found. It said, low self-esteem developed at a young age can trigger violent behaviour. For example, a person may feel badly about themselves following a traumatic or an abusive childhood, but they may appear confident, for example. But that's likely a defence mechanism. And if that person's then humiliated, they're less likely to be able to tolerate it. And then a violent response may restore a sense of self-worth, a sense of pride. And that will also then punish whoever's sort of committed this injury upon them, or this humiliation upon them.
It's like there's a standing up for yourself.
Yeah, and to me, that's what happens in this film with Joker.
He stands up to his own aggressors, to his own bullies.
Exactly. Including, at the end, Murray. So he thinks Murray is the father figure. So Murray is the first father figure that he has. He has Murray, the television show host, and he has Thomas Wayne in the film. And eventually he realises that Murray is the same as the rest of them. Because if you watch it, he's planning to commit suicide throughout the entire thing. Well, not the entire thing, but he's planning to commit suicide on the show. He's going to tell the joke.
Yeah, right, exactly.
He's going to shoot himself
Pull
in the head.
Gun out.
But he's made a mockery of on the show, not just having the video shown, but he can't even get his knock-knock joke out without being basically bullied. And he then says, that Murray is just like the rest of them, and then he basically has this reactive aggression against Murray and kills him. And that seemed to be an example that I'd found in this kind of new area of research on aggression, which it seems very common sense. If someone humiliates you and you've had an abusive childhood and you feel sort of shame and ineffectualness and low self-esteem, you might use that to try and bolster yourself against the world and restore a sense of self. Well, I sort of feel like that's what Joker is doing. Have you seen, though, that that there's a lot of these protesters using the Joker masks in their protests?
No. Where's this?
France is a good example.
What, you mean like they're putting Joker masks on and protesting?
They're putting the face paint on and they're protesting.
Right.
Yeah, so you've got, for example, the French firefighters protesting about pensions.
Those French.
Yeah, well...
always protesting.
They're always protesting. I mean, I'm in France all the time because of my family, and I'm getting there. Whenever I go, and I go multiple times a year, it's always, you sort of think, are the trains running? I know there are trains, but whether they're running is an entirely different situation. And usually I'll turn up at the train station, and there's people outside having a party and a barbecue very often. I have to get a bus, like some kind of replacement. Really like their trade unions over there. And... yeah, they recently, the firefighters, they set themselves on fire in these riots. One would assume, I can't find any sources stating that they're using fire jackets, the ones that they use in Hollywood to set yourselves on fire without hurting you. I can't find anything saying that's what they're doing.
Well, presumably theirs should do that.
Yeah, fire retardant, but I mean, it's not the same as in Hollywood, because these people are like fully on fire. Like in Hollywood, obviously, it's going to be constructed so as to set alight, but to be protective. Whereas, obviously, a firefighter's fire retardant clothing is not meant to catch a light in a really elaborate and flamboyant way.
Or maybe they're pouring some fluid on it to make it burn off quickly. But they're painting their faces as why are they using Joker? Have they made any statements about why they're using Joker masks? Is it kind of a cynical thing, or is it kind of a following? Is it? It's
a bit like a following. It's basically. It's pointing at the dispossessed. It's pointing at those people that are being dispossessed by the elites, right? So if you look at, for example, Trump's America and the middle Americans that believe they've been dispossessed by an elitist society. The same with Brexit as well. It's these kind of people in this new populist world that feel some level of identity.
Because they're being made a mockery of by celebrities on TV.
Right, exactly. And
for
politicians.
the gain of those politicians on TV.
So, I mean, I found one article saying from Chile to Lebanon and from Hong Kong to Iraq, people are actually wearing this face paint in their demonstrations.
And is it for all different kinds of movements, or is it just like specifically fire brigades?
No, all different kinds of movement. But yeah, fire brigades, that's for pensions. But it is, if you look at it, it's quite incredible just to watch these people in Joker face paint on fire, fighting with the police, fighting with riot police. It's an incredible thing to see. And it does make you wonder where we're moving to as a society. But it's incredible how that film has taken hold of people.
Yeah.
And how people have identified with it. So you say, look, this... to me, I went on that journey. I said, I see how he got there. But I can't identify with it in a first-person way. I can't sort of say, I empathise to the extent that I know those feelings. But a lot of people can.
That's pretty scary.
That is pretty scary. Thanks for listening to Abstracts. The music, as always, was copied by Cambo, which can be found on the Free Music Archive. The link can be found in the description. For references for this and all episodes, visit our website at www.abstractspodcast.com. That's abstractspodcast.com.